Hey, everybody, welcome to Wednesday and another episode of Eating and Meeting Live. I am in a little bit different position today in my house because we're getting custom new countertops in there and it's a little bit noisy in my office. So I've moved into another place. So I brought my sign with me, though. Where is it? Right there. And I'm so excited to introduce you to my North Carolina native friend, or not native friend, but North Carolina friend. I shop with him at the New Bern Farmers Market, and I'm so excited for you to learn about what he's doing with his um, fruits and vegetables that he's growing. Founder of Harlowe Custom Microgreens and author of So You Want to Grow Microgreens, the second edition, is Ryan Willet. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, how's it going today, Tracy?
I am good. How are you?
Good, good.
So we met. I gotta put do not disturb on here. We met like 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
I think it was
Um,
about 3 years ago.
yep, at the New Bern Farmers Market, and you were selling microgreens.
Yes.
And it was really cool because I wish I had a picture of them, but you had the big, not slabs, but what do you call them?
We bring
Trays,
live trays to the market. So,
trays, and you cut them.
um,
Yeah.
yes.
So tell people about that.
Um,
You've got wasabi ones
yes.
and
We bring about anywhere between 7 and 11 different varieties to the market,
okay.
depending on what we have available,
Mm-hmm.
each week. And we bring kind of a litany of flavor profiles. So starting on the more mild end, we have stuff like peas and sunflowers and kohlrabi or red cabbage, and then gradually works its way hotter and hotter until you end up into like the spicy mustards and the daikon radish. We bring that profile or that selection and profile so that we can kind of cater to everybody as
Mm-hmm.
much as possible. And then we throw in some specialty stuff every now and then. So we'll bring like a tray of shingitku, which is a really pretty Asian green that's in the chrysanthemum family, and
Okay.
it has this beautiful serrated leaf, kind of a green flavor up front, but then it brings in this really nice smooth citrus flavor on the back end. Our local chefs like to use it to pair with pan-fried whitefish, like a
Okay.
grouper, a mahi, flounder, something like that. Even a sea bass goes really well with it. A little lemon caper sauce, a little bit of shingitku, perfect.
Okay. So how do you, I mean, you're telling these flavors from these different fruits or vegetables. How are these little tiny microgreens? Are they like the beginning little buds that you see in the ground when you're trying to grow your own broccoli? Is that
That's
what that
exactly
is?
that's
Okay.
exactly what it is. So if you buy a pack of broccoli seed or something from Walmart
Mm-hmm.
or wherever, it'll have planting instructions on the back, and it'll say
Okay.
one seed every 12 inches or every 18 inches, and let it grow for this many days, 79 to 90 days, depending on what it is, and then you can harvest the full size broccoli. So what we do is we condense that planting way, way down because
Okay.
the seedling um, the first 7 to 10 days, the seedling that grows has as much nutrition as 10 or I'm sorry, is 10 times more nutritious than the same by volume of a mature plant. So
Wow.
so if you take 1 ounce of mature broccoli against 1 ounce of microgreen broccoli, there will be 10 times the nutrition in that 1 ounce of microgreen versus the full size. And you produce it in anywhere between 7 and 21 days, depending on the variety. Brassicas are usually more in the 7 to 12 day range,
Okay.
which broccoli is a brassica. Same with the cabbage. Um, but we, instead of planting one seed every 10 inches or 12 inches, we plant about 10 to 15 in a square inch. So our
Wow.
density is way, way higher.
Okay. And then you when you bring it to the market, which I think is kind of cool, you're not are you using scissors or are you using a blade?
We use a fillet knife.
Okay.
The razor blade on the fillet knife gives a beautifully sharp cut. If you were to look at it underneath a microscope, you would see this really sharp-edged cut through the stem, where if you use scissors, it actually kind of crushes through the plant and it shortens the shelf life by a little bit.
Wow. Okay. And then that's super interesting. And then you take that tray back because everybody's come and bought all your microgreens. What do you
Yep.
do with that tray?
So
Because
that
it's still got the soil in it and then the leftover
Mhm.
buds. Right.
Still has the root mass,
Yep.
the stems, the short stems that we haven't used, and then it contains all of the soil base that we've used to grow in. So we use that to compost down, and
Okay.
that's kind of the beginning of our loop for the farm. So each leg of the farm kind of depends on the other in certain ways. Um, we have chickens, so we take their litter and waste and used eggshells and all that, and we put that into the compost pile. And we have a hydroponic greenhouse that we'll talk about in a few minutes, I'm sure.
Right.
We take the refuse from there and we added that to the refuse from the microgreen operation, and we compost all of that together. And then in somewhere between 6 months and a year, we move that compost out to our market garden, and we use that to feed the soil and refresh and replenish the soil for all the crops that we're raising in the market garden. And there's lots of refuse that comes from that as well that goes back
Mhm.
into the system.
Wow. Okay. So what I find interesting is that this is not what you were doing 5 years ago. Or I mean, you were a Marine and now you work for the city for the government,
Hmm.
right?
I do.
And so now you're a farmer as well on the side.
I am.
So talk
So
about that.
so in an earlier life, I was a Marine. I,
Hoorah! I'm a Marine brat.
our
Er,
So after roughly 10 years, I left active service, and from there continued my career in IT. Eventually, coming to work here and with the government and finishing my computer science degree. Um, in the midst of all of that, I found life to be very sedentary, and I was getting heavier. Um, my health was slipping pretty bad, and the doctor was like, you need to make some changes. Things are not going well. So I visited with a nutritionist, and she helped me in a couple of areas. First was portion control. I learned what a normal size portion for somebody was supposed to be.
mhm.
Apparently, I,
Which
I
is,
ate twice or three times as much as I was supposed to be eating.
I
That
think we
was that
all
was a
do,
hard wake
right?
up.
Yeah.
Um, but she also taught me some simple stuff for bringing in more greens into my diet, um, just adding them in different places and doing one for ones.
Okay.
So, for example, on a sandwich, instead of eating, bread, which is full of carbohydrates and wheat, both of, and gluten, which is an irritant to the body. It causes inflammation. So use a large piece of lettuce as your wrap, and chop up some kale and drop it in
Mhm.
there, or add some sunflowers to it, or any one of the brassicas that you grow as a microgreen, add those in as additional fodder, and then add in whatever meat and cucumber, if you will, and then use a mustard instead of mayonnaise. Gives it that extra flavor, but at the same time doesn't bring a ton of extra calories. Um, so she taught me simple additions like that. Adding spinach or chopped kale to my eggs in the morning, easy
Mhm.
way to get a full cup to 2 cups worth of greens into my diet. And I eat eggs every single morning, so that was an easy one. Just a couple extra seconds to chop some greens and throw them in.
Mhm.
Just little one for ones like that went a long way.
And that just kind of changed the way you ate in general, right?
That that was the turning of the tide, so to speak. It
Right.
it initiated some massive changes. But what I found in making these changes was that um, eating massive amounts of greens can be a little on the expensive side.
It can
Um,
be. Yeah.
especially if you're eating stuff like spinach or kale. Um, or kohlrabi leaves or something like
Hmm.
that. That's not necessarily very common. And if you're pursuing the organic side of it, simply so it's clean and not covered in chemicals, it gets a little more expensive.
Hmm.
I used to not farm, I would garden with my
Okay.
dad as a kid,
Hmm.
and I had the land to do it. So I tried to grow my own. And Mother Nature taught me some lessons, mainly that bugs will eat everything.
Yes, they
Um,
do.
so I struggled with that. Also struggled with the native soil here and not understanding how to work with it due to its deficiencies.
Hmm.
Um, and it was about that time that I saw somebody's project online, where they had to build an aquaponic setup for a class project.
Okay.
Um, and aquaponics is a method of using fish in a tank to feed your plants the nutrient base that they need to survive.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
it's this interesting system where you have a giant tank of fish. Tilapia are the most common because they're pretty fast growers. So you have a tank of tilapia and you feed the tilapia and they just exist in the water. And you circulate their tank water out and you send it to another kind of water tank where lettuce floats on rafts and the roots hang down in this water. And then there's another pump
Wow.
that pulls that water out and sends it back to the fish tank. So it's this giant recirculation. And the fish, as they create waste in the water, are feeding the plants downstream.
Wow.
So I saw this setup and I was pretty fascinated by it. I'd never seen
Uh-huh.
anything like it. Started doing some reading, some research, and quickly ascertained that that whole system was not for me. Trying to get a fish to poop what I needed to grow a lettuce seemed really, really complicated.
Okay.
But at the same time, I learned about hydroponics and deep water culture. And deep water culture is a type of hydroponic growing in
Okay.
which, much like the lettuce on the raft we were just talking about,
Hmm.
you plant plants in these little net cups, and their roots grow and hang down into a big water tank
I've seen
that
that.
has a little
Okay.
air stone in the bottom to oxygenate it. And the plants will pull what they need from the water to grow above, on the raft. So I was like, hey, I can do that. If I just have to load nutrient salts to the water, I can do that. It just cuts out
Hmm.
the step of the fish. So I started learning with that, and I grew various things. I tried spinach, and I tried lettuce, and I tried kale, and some arugula. I tried a strawberry plant. Just different things.
Hmm.
Um, and by the end of the first year of playing with this deep water culture, I had 6 kale palm trees, and I wish I had kept a picture of it. But the kale plants were just a single stalk that were about 2 feet tall and had this little poof of leaves at the top. So it kind of looked like a palm tree or a coconut tree on an island. And I had 6 of these. And I could go in every day and snap fresh kale off of these and do whatever I wanted with it. And I had a roommate at the time who was taking an interest in watching all this go and was, helping me eat the kale and the other stuff I grew.
Uh-huh.
Um, but from there, it became, I got into a different type of hydroponics called nutrient film transfer, which is
Okay.
basically a trough. Um, it starts with a water tank, and you pump water from the tank into a trough. Gravity pulls the water through the trough from one end to the other, and then into a return pipe back to the tank. And your hydroponic plants sit in that trough, and the roots grow out on the bottom of it and pick up the nutrients from the water as it flows over the roots back to the tank. And water circulates 24/7, over these roots, keeping them happy and growing. So I did a small one of these inside a spare room of the house, and played with that for about a year,
Uh-huh.
and experimented with it in all kinds of ways. And then when I was confident in my ability to grow in a controlled environment setting, um, I built a greenhouse.
Okay.
14 by 25 greenhouse from scratch. Pretty much everything came out of Lowe's. Had no real idea what I was doing. Just kind of figured everything out on the fly with lots of
Uh-huh.
research, and to be honest, lots of YouTube.
Right. It
Um,
is helpful,
yes.
isn't it? Yes.
So about the time that I was getting into um, building the greenhouse, I started expanding my microgreen operation, as far
Okay.
as not necessarily for selling, but just increasing my ability to grow different ones. And I always had too much between the greenhouse and the little deep water culture setup and the microgreens. I always had way too much for just me and my roommates to eat. So we gave it away to friends.
Okay.
And eventually, somebody connected me with a restaurant owner in Moorhead,
Okay.
and it was a little wine and sandwich shop, and they wanted to use it on their salads and stuff like that. So I supplied them for about a year, maybe a year and a half,
Mhm.
before you I think the hurricane came along and everything just changed after that.
Right.
Uh, but that's kind of how the business started, was just wanting to eat better for myself and always having too much. So I kept learning and wanting to try different things, and created an excess of food, giving that food away, and then eventually selling some of that excess and then becoming a full business.
So what kind of, I mean, and I want to talk about the fact that you have three different kinds of growing on the farm now.
Hmm.
But to do that, is that a different kind of license, farming license, or is it? And well, let's just go talk about that, because you've got the hydroponic greenhouse, and I'm reading this to make sure I get it. The
Yes.
microgreen production room, and then the
Hmm.
market garden beds, which are the outdoor beds that are
Correct.
regular soil ground, right? So
Hmm.
to be able to sell those, do you have to have a different type of
It
permit?
it's all agricultural. It all
Okay.
falls under an agricultural permit.
Okay.
Um, there are some different tax laws about how you prepare the item for sale, and
Gotcha.
whether it's resold and things like that. But as far as the ability to grow and sell directly, no.
Okay.
It all falls under an agricultural permit. We
And
have,
go ahead.
we are insured, we're bonded, um, and we follow the good agricultural practices as far as handling food from the
Mhm.
field to the restaurant.
Right.
If you look at the labels on any of our boxes, that we are prepackaged boxes,
Hmm.
um, or any of the bags of greens that we sell and stuff like that, you'll see on the label, please wash your greens.
Right.
So um, there are some that we wash ahead of time, but most of the microgreens are not washed because water causes them to break down very, very fast. So
Gotcha.
if we wet them and then dry them, and then any kind of moisture ends up in the package, it causes them to break down very, very quickly.
Interesting. Okay. And I do
So
like the fact that when you give it to them, you slice it and then you give it to me in one of those compostable brown boxes versus
yes,
a plastic container or a plastic bag. And I like that. And it
all
lasts
of our
longer, right?
yes. Well, the
Mhm.
the cardboard box is just for transport. So
Okay.
when you get home, move that, the contents of the cardboard box into a hard container like glass, or,
Oh,
Pyrex
okay.
or Tupperware,
I
something
didn't
like
do
that
that.
with a lid.
I was
Um,
keeping them in the box. Okay.
you'll actually get about 10 to 12 days worth of shelf life out of them if you put
Okay.
them in a hard container and just
Oh,
pop the
okay.
lid once a day.
Okay.
The
Oh, all right.
the cardboard isn't sealed enough and allows the refrigerator to pull too much moisture out of the plants.
Okay.
But oddly, and not oddly enough, funny enough, most of our customers never notice because they don't last long enough. Like they
Exactly.
consume them
Mhm.
before the wilt hits.
Right.
Um, with that said, though, we use all compostable packaging. As it Almost everything we use is compostable. I think offhand, I think the only thing we have left hanging out there right now is the clear plastic bags that our greens come in.
Okay.
Um, and that is, we did try compostable packaging for those, but you
Mhm.
can't see through it.
Right, because they're that
And
greeny
yeah,
color or whatever. Yeah.
and people
Okay.
won't buy greens they can't see, which makes
Right.
sense.
Exactly.
But our microgreen boxes are industrial level compostable, meaning that if it goes into a pile of mulch that hits 130 degrees for 10 days, it will disappear.
Wow.
Um, Unfortunately, in this area, we don't really have a method to transport from the end consumer to the industrial
I
facilities that
know.
do the composting. But I have played with a couple of boxes in my own compost pile, and
Mhm.
it takes a little longer, but they do break down.
Because,
Um,
well, thankfully, we're not to 130 degrees.
yes,
Right.
my piles get quite hot. They
Oh,
get
do
up
they? Okay.
110, 120
Okay.
degrees, and
Mm-hmm.
that's normal aerobic activity for them. Um, but it takes a little longer. The packaging is a plant-based resin,
Mm-hmm.
so even just putting it on the dashboard of your car will melt it into a puddle,
Oh,
like in the
wow.
summer. They do melt pretty quick, but the green bags that we use, the bio bags, those are
Mm-hmm.
compostable. They break down in about 40 days in an average
Wow.
compost pile. Um, and then obviously the brown boxes break down very quickly. And then
Yeah,
even our egg cartons are pressed paper so that those
okay.
will break down.
Okay. Yeah, I actually researched trying to compost in New Bern, and the guy said he would. I found one company. He's like, "We'll take it," but I'm like, I don't have enough. It's hard because, and actually in Hillsborough, North Carolina, just what 2.5 hours away, they actually at their dump, which we have right off of 70 here, they actually have a compost one
Hmm.
that you can take your own food over there and compost. And I would love our dump to add that, but yeah, it's hard. We're hard to find. And even the oyster composting or, recycling, I have to drive a bit to do it now. But
There's oyster shell trailers all over Morehead City and Beaufort,
okay.
but
Hmm.
once you get inland, they get fewer and further between.
Right. Yeah. So, well, it means I just need to come to Morehead more often. And that's
There you go.
Morehead City, North Carolina, for everybody who's not from North Carolina.
Yes.
Beautiful little beach town, with one of the best. I love the Ruddy Duck restaurant, um, because they make gluten-free food, gluten-free fried shrimp. But okay, so talk to me about explain to everybody the difference between the hydroponic greenhouse, the microgreen production room, and is that still in your house? And then the market garden beds
Okay.
and soil. And let's talk soil too. Yeah.
Um, the microgreen operation is still in the wing of the house. We
Okay.
keep it separate from everything else. We have to run dehumidifiers and air conditioners and fans and stuff like that to keep the room um, within the right growing conditions, and keep it separated from everything else. And then that in itself is such its own interesting biosphere, because
Okay.
the heat and the humidity produced by the lighting, we use automated lighting, and we keep fans running 24/7, and we have to dehumidify. Every morning we have to water, bottom water everything. So it's got its own little ecology inside this room
Wow.
of that has to be managed. And then depending on what you're planting and how much of what you're planting can change all of those characteristics. So you have to keep fine tuning the room based on what you're using it for or what's passing through it that particular week. Some things are super sensitive to humidity and other things are not.
Okay.
Um, and we work with about 31 different types of microgreens. We have a
Wow.
pretty extensive seed bank. Um, and learning each one of those has been quite the quite the ride. I mean, I ended up at the encouragement of my sister, because I kept so much information in my head about how to do everything. She was like, if anybody ever needs to help you or like you get sick, there's nobody knows how to do this but you. You need to write this down. Um, so I did write
Talk
everything
to every
down.
meeting planner you know. Yes.
She's a former event planner, so um, she encouraged me to write everything down, which is how we arrived at the book, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Awesome.
But the hydroponics, we experimented with a variety of different plants and different things to grow, um, and eventually Rebecca and I settled on like 5 types of lettuce, and we rotate those based on the time of year.
Okay.
Some do better in the heat. Some do are much more palatable, in the winter. early spring months. So Rebecca and I spent quite a bit of time field trialing about 2 dozen types of lettuce, and she was, she helped me pick the right flavor complexes for the right times of year.
Okay.
Um, I'm not a super picky eater. Like, you put food down, I'll eat it. She has a much more refined palate, and so using that that skill, she was like, this will go better with these summer foods, and these will go better with um, winter soups or something like that.
Hmm.
So she was able to help refine out our product listing of the different types of lettuce or kale or basils that we grow in the hydroponic greenhouse. Um, and then all of this, in the beginning, I was just kind of piling the refuse from the microgreens up in the backyard, and we have a fairly decent sized piece of land, and there's a little hill towards the back, end of the backyard, and I was just kind
Hmm.
of piling stuff up back there. And when I first began and I was processing maybe 4 or 5 trays a week, that wasn't really a big deal because the rain would come and basically wash it all out, and the piles would dissipate on their own. But when we moved upwards of 100 trays a week,
Oh,
that
wow.
was a lot of compost that had to be dealt with.
Hmm.
Um, but we also realized that in this rural community, we did some evaluations of how many people there are and what our available market was and how much we could sell to that market. What we figured out was that microgreens alone wouldn't pay the bills, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um, and while the lettuce was a big help, that the hydroponic greenhouse and all of that produced was a good help, we needed to be able to offer additional things. Um, so from there, we decided to fill that need to offer additional things with solving a problem of what to do with large amounts of compost.
Hmm.
Um, and we put those together. And it was around that time and that part of solving the issues that I came in contact with a concept of growing called market gardening, and
Okay.
um, employing techniques that are known as no-till growing. And
Okay.
the idea behind that is to keep the soil in um, perpetual perpetual state of photosynthesis, meaning something is always growing on the bed all year round. Whether you're growing
Okay.
a crop or a cover crop, something is continuing to work that soil year round. Um, and the other premise is literally that you don't ever till it. You obviously need to prepare the beds initially, and that's accepted in the industry, your
Right.
initial tillage to create and form your beds. But after that, you don't ever disturb any more than the top inch to inch and a half of the soil, because that's where the ozone is. And below that ozone, from the inch and a half to about 3 to 4 inches down, is where all your bacterial and microbial life is living. And if you turn over that top 4 inches and bring it to the surface, you'll kill
Hmm.
it.
Oh, wow.
So
So no hoeing or anything like that.
we use stirrupos, which basically slide a razor blade underneath the top half inch of soil and just
Okay.
cut the plant from the root base. And then you
Okay.
rake up the debris at the end and get rid of it.
Okay.
But you don't ever dig down into the soil and bring it back up. Um,
Okay.
we use a broad fork in order to deal with soil compaction issues, because plants don't like compacted soil. They don't do
Okay.
very well trying to force their roots through that tightly packed soil. So we use a broad fork, which is literally just a giant fork that you step on and you send it down into the soil and you just rock it back about halfway, and it
Okay.
just lifts the soil a little bit, just breaks
Hmm.
it, and allows some of that compost from the top layer to fall down into the crevices. And by repeatedly doing that, you introduce more and more compost into that top 10 to 12 inches of soil. You begin to break more of it up and create a better environment for the root systems of your plants.
So isn't that like, what do they do that on the yards when they on golf courses they
They're
um
they're using an
was
aerator on that.
yeah, so
It's
kind of similar.
Similar. They're
Okay.
breaking up the ground, but they're also trying to get oxygen down into that soil,
Uh-huh.
um, because the hard compacted soil just doesn't have any life in it. There's no
Mm-hmm.
oxygen layer to feed any of the aerobic activity.
Mm-hmm.
So they break it up with that. It's basically a spiked wheel in order to
Right.
do that.
Okay.
Um, I think that's also a premise of dethatching, is
Okay.
to do the same thing.
Okay.
So also with the no-till process, we try and leave as much of the root ball in place as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we terminate our crops is a little bit different as well.
What do you
So
mean by that?
so when we grow our little baby heads of bok choy,
Okay.
we'll take a knife and cut it off, the root off, right at the soil level, and just
Okay.
leave that behind. And
Okay.
then the next crop that we will plant in between those root stobs and
Okay.
allow all of that to remain in the soil and break down over time. Because that root mass from that bok choy plant holds all kinds of fungal and bacterial life that was existent around those roots. And if you rip it out and throw it in a compost pile, well, it's great for adding stuff to the compost pile, but you're robbing it from your bed where it's really needed. So you just cut it off and leave it behind and work around it if as you need. And then we terminate crops in a different way, um, like a bed of arugula.
Okay.
We'll plant 50 feet of arugula very, very densely so we can cut it for baby leaf.
Mm-hmm.
And when that crop is played out and needs to be terminated, um, we'll come in with a weed eater and take it as close to the ground as we can. And
Mm-hmm.
all of that refuse falls in on the bed. And then we take silage tarps and we pull it over the bed itself and break it down and just trap all of that moisture and all of that green on top of the bed underneath.
Uh-huh.
And over the next 7 to 12 days, all of that will break down to the point, far enough that we can come back and plant right back through it with something else. And we're
Wow.
keeping all of that matter, all that root mass down below, and all of the green matter on top in place and letting it go back into the ground.
Okay, so I have two thoughts and then we're going to get to your book. One
Okay.
is you're an IT guy now.
Yes.
And wow, I mean that's biology, right? That's not technology and things like that.
It's
Is it
not.
the same brain function thinking about that?
Um, it's a successful gardening is largely revolves around trial and error, but more so around observation and problem solving.
Okay.
IT
Okay.
is very much the same. It's the same
Mm-hmm.
logical thought process, um, where you do something, you make notes on what you did, and then you watch the outcome. Well, that didn't work. Adjust fire, try again, and you
Right.
you problem solve. Um, Rebecca is famous for the question, well, why? You know, it I mess stuff up all the time. People
Uh-huh.
see successful trays and piles of abundance on our farmers markets tables, but there are thousands of plants behind that didn't make it because the farmer didn't do his job right. And
Gotcha.
she is very logical minded, just like I am. So she helps walk through that process of why something didn't work or why this one particular method did work. What did we do different? Why is this better? Or why did this not happen? And it's wonderful to have that kind of sounding board because you can convince yourself of anything in your own head.
Right.
This the weather caused every failure that I've ever had. No, the weather didn't. I didn't do something or
Mm-hmm.
I did too much of something. Um, so having a partner that can work through that process with you because she thinks the same way is
Mm-hmm.
just it's super cool.
Well, and then your sister also suggesting writing it down too, because then you're probably documenting, what you did on this one and what you did on
Yes.
that one, and then that way you can see on the next round what. Yeah, that's
What worked
smart.
and what didn't.
Hmm.
And
Exactly.
I have to admit, I am notorious for not documenting stuff.
Oh, me
Um,
too.
it I don't know if it's an IT trait or what, but I would rather do the work than make the documentation. I've always been that
Yep.
way.
Hmm.
So my sister and Rebecca both have stayed on me especially when it comes to the garden, because there's
Yeah,
so much more going on out there as far as the working with our native soil and taking it from something that could not grow anything successfully to growing stuff
that's
consistently
awesome.
successfully. Really and truly, our only major complication at this point is the flea beetles.
Oh, really?
And because we're no spray, we
Mm-hmm.
don't use hazardous chemicals, herbicides or pesticides. We really struggle to get control of that particular population, bug population, because there's
Mm-hmm.
not a whole lot of natural predators for it. And it,
Okay.
it is a voracious feeder on the things that we grow.
Well, and the other day you actually posted a picture of a bug. What was that bug?
That was an assassin bug.
Okay, yeah. So what does he assassinate?
Everything. Um,
Everything except for that beetle.
no, they will eat those.
Okay.
But um, the assassin bug is an apex predator in its environment, meaning that it's a hunter. It hunts other
Okay.
bugs, and it feeds happily on pretty much everything else, kind of like a praying mantis. Um, but because it is at the top of the food chain for what it does, there's not that many of them. So it's easily outnumbered by its food. So they're always busy. Whenever we find them in the garden, they're always working on something.
Oh,
Like they've
wow.
always got a bug that they're eating. We do release we do use praying mantis eggs, and we'll put 3 or 4 of those throughout the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And those will release anywhere between 50 and 200 young praying manti when they hatch,
What? Per
um,
egg?
per egg. Um,
Wow.
the egg is about the size of a robin egg, so
Okay.
it's maybe a little bit bigger, um, like a walnut. It's the size of a walnut.
Okay.
And those little guys will hatch out and climb all over the garden, and they will go to work. And we use beneficial nematodes, which are parasitic worms that are microscopic, and we
Mm-hmm.
introduce those to the soil via spraying. We get those in, mix them into the water, and then spray them back out. And in doing that, those parasites feed on the larvae of other bugs that are in the soil. One of them being the flea
Mm-hmm.
beetle, um, throughout the winter and spring, and cut down on the population that actually hatches. So we do use pest control measures. We just don't use chemical pest control measures.
Gotcha.
But we also try not to fight upstream. This time of year, from around mid-May until like the middle of August, we'll
Okay.
cut back on our greens production, like our bok
Okay.
choy and the arugula and pak choy, tot soy, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We'll cut back on all of that because it doesn't do anything but feed the beetles.
Oh, okay.
So rather than fight Mother Nature, tooth and nail, we just stop working with that, and we focus our efforts towards the tomatoes and the cucumbers, the peppers. We focus more on those longer season crops that we work with that do better under bug pressure than greens do.
Okay, so I want to ask what about deer and rabbits? We have a lot of them where I am.
Um, Oddly enough, we live right on the edge of the national forest, and we don't
Okay.
have a deer problem. Um,
Really?
Apparently, the hunters do quite the job of keeping that under control. Um, we do have some rabbits. We
Hmm.
have, when they're babies, they can fit through the fence wire, but
Right.
as they become adults, they become excluded. So we just kind
Okay.
of tolerate them and run them out as necessary. But once they become adults, they're too big to get through the wire.
Gotcha.
Um, and then other than that, we keep the area around the garden fairly open, which
Hmm.
discourages a lot of other things from coming in.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, but
All right. So you started jotting all this stuff down
yes.
and you wrote and so tell me about this book and I and how do people get it?
So I started, again, at the encouragement of my sister and Rebecca, I started writing all of this stuff down. And it started with a little notebook that we kept in the cupboard that could be pulled out and used like a reference manual. And the
Mm-hmm.
notebook had like what I do every day of the week, what got planted on what days, what got harvested on what days. And it was like a little instruction manual that should somebody need to, they could come behind me, pick it up, read it, and do what needed to be done for the most part during that day.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started adding some growing notes about um, what we needed to do for each particular type of microgreen.
Okay.
And like I said, with 31 different types, they all need their own little level of finesse. So the instructions became more and more detailed about how much goes on a tray, if they get soaked in water ahead of time or not, whether they get compressed for a couple of days or whether they go into a blackout phase for a couple of days. All of this got written down, and then as more and more of that started coming out, somewhere the inspiration to create a book came, and I struggled with it for about a year, and I'd pick it up and put it down, and just I wasn't making any progress. And
Mm-hmm.
then something finally snapped, and I sat down and just started typing, and um, I it was hours and hours. Information just poured out, and it was in no particular order. It wasn't fluent or fluid. I mean, it was a huge brain and data dump, just poof into a document.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then from there, I went through and kind of shifted the information around so that it was a little more cohesive and had
Mm-hmm.
some process. And then from there, I kind of went backwards a little bit, and I created an outline of what I wanted to write. And then I
Right.
went into this data dump and found what I had written that would fall into it. And then I used that
Okay.
outline to create the order.
Cool.
And what we ended up with was this this little book. I don't know if it shows
Right.
up
It went
well.
blurry. Yeah.
Eh,
Put
it
it in
went
front
blurry.
of your face and see.
Nah, it doesn't work.
No. Okay.
This little book, it's about 127 pages,
Okay.
and it's called So You Want to Grow Microgreens. And the target audience was anybody who wanted to begin growing at any scale. So if you
Okay.
wanted to grow for yourself, just a couple of small trays, it tells you how to build a small setup with what trays to use and what lighting considerations to make and air and fans and all that stuff. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted to scale up from something that you've already built into a more commercial setup, all of
Okay.
the things that you need to calculate out, like what's your electricity draw, what how much water do you need per day, what design does your room need to have, what does your workflow space need to look like, and it takes all of that into account and kind of lays it all out for you.
Very
um,
cool.
and it goes into if you want to work at a farmer's market, it shows you what a basic setup looks like and gives you some options between live cut and pre-packaged and how to make the decision of what works best for you. And that's really what the whole premise of the book was to help people decide whether they wanted to even get into this or not.
Right. That's
um,
good. That's fantastic. And oh shoot, something just popped into my head and it popped right back out. I it's it well, and the title of what I named this is that I mean, you started doing this for your health, but
mhm.
it also I said, you said somewhere, we farm because everyone knows farming is hard work, but somehow that comment just doesn't cover it. It's a job with high output and, to be honest, meager return. But we don't farm to get rich. We farm because it's who we are. It's what makes our soul happy, and I love that.
It is.
Yeah,
Sinking my hands into the soil at the end of the day is absolutely where my sanity is found.
that's
um,
fantastic.
Having a desk job, sometimes you question your own sanity of what you're doing and like,
Hmm.
what is all this for? But then you go home and you sink your hands into the soil and you mold that soil or you shape it or help encourage it. And then this little seedling pops out of it, and it's nothing but hope and promise of what can be done and what will come.
All right, and our friend Rachel said, "Love the story of how you got started, Ryan."
Hi, Rachel.
And Rachel, I wholeheartedly agree as well. And so and then kind of going to that point, I mean, you work a 9 to 5 job or probably a little bit longer, and then you drive home and you work in the yard. And does Rebecca do the same thing?
She does. She's right there beside me the entire time. We
And
both
so
go to,
she's got a full-time job too.
yes, and her full-time job actually requires more hours than mine.
Oh, wow.
So, we have a standing date every Wednesday night. We cut
Mhm.
the order for the restaurants to go out on Thursday. Um, every weekend, she's right there at the farmers market,
Yep.
doing her market, and
With
I'm
her
doing mine.
tallness and her beautiful hair. Yes.
Those eyes are what do it for me.
Oh, okay.
But in addition to that, throughout the week, we both have different parts of the business that we do, and she does a lot of our social media.
Hmm.
Um, she is also that second set of hands because one set of hands can't do everything.
Right.
Sometimes you just get tied up and you need that extra set of hands, and she's always that extra set of hands.
That's fantastic. I'm glad you love have somebody to help you with that. And Rachel, such rewarding work. And I have to say that about you and Joe as well. So, and your kiddos that you're raising on the farm. So thank you for what you do for our local farmers
Yes.
as farm all of our residents as well. So I mean, I'm grateful for it. And I do want to ask one question because I saw this article the other day and
Hmm.
it was just about food, um the future of food at work. I don't know if it was that article or another one. Is like a lot of people are like, because of lack of staffing, ditching the microgreens because it's like this one little extra step, but it's got so much nutrition in it over and above that. But have you seen that with your restaurants, or are you getting more people just buying them for home?
Um, so with the restaurants, we've actually increased our awareness and our footprint in the immediate area, and we have
Mhm.
more restaurants using our product,
Awesome. Yes.
which is fantastic. Um, we're actually considering commercial space at this point because we can't really meet the demand that we're
Yay!
at um, comfortably.
Right.
It's so that's a topic of discussion. I don't know where that'll go yet. Um, but we are a luxury item, so it's not necessarily a staffing issue of not using microgreens because it literally is just an extra second or two on the way out of the line for somebody to
Right.
put them on. But we are a luxury item, so we're expensive. As far as pound, price per pound, microgreens are expensive.
Hmm.
Um, if you look at everything that goes into creating the product, it's very laborious, and there's a lot of back end cost because seed is expensive now. Um, so we are a luxury item to the chef, and then when money gets tight for the chef, we are the first thing to go,
Okay.
and it's understandable. With that said, our clientele at the farmers market and private customers that we have, their demand is ever present. There's different times of the year where it's greater than others. In the spring
Hmm.
there's a huge demand, and then moving into the heat of the summer, the farmers markets really do drop off a lot.
Right.
But then moving back into the fall, when it starts to cool off, people start coming back to the markets and the demand goes up again. We see the orders from the retail stores that we work with in Carteret County. We see those almost double around the major holidays.
Wow. That's
So
awesome.
they'll go from 10 pieces a week to 20 pieces, for example, or 20 to 40, depending on which retailer it is. So around those major holidays, they know that they're going to get a boom of tourist traffic. They buy more to anticipate that.
Wow, that's awesome that
Yes.
they see it from the tourism as well, not just
Hmm.
from the locals.
Yes.
And I think that's a really good point for people to understand that tourism does bring a lot of money even to our farmers,
Yep.
right? It brings revenue not just to a hotel, it brings revenue to our local farmers.
We have the vacation supported agriculture through the Carteret Local Food Network,
Okay, yep,
which it's like the CSA boxes that you can get here locally from your farmers,
right,
which is community supported agriculture,
right.
um, where a farmer puts together a box and you buy a membership to the farm for say $25 a week, and you get a box of food every week off of the farm, hopefully equivalent to that value that you've paid in if the farmer's doing his job well. But
Right.
if there are crop failures, then what
Exactly.
vegetables you do get become a lot more expensive.
Right.
With the vacation supported agriculture that the Food Network runs,
Mm-hmm.
they field those boxes directly towards tourists. So people that are coming
Never heard
into
that.
an Airbnb can click an extra box and opt to have one of these boxes delivered to their door, at their
That's
vacation rental.
awesome.
And the Shanks take part in that too. There's a number of other farmers in the area that work with the Food Network to do that, and we supply products. So we get notices, each month of how many boxes they'll have per week for each week of the month, and
Mm-hmm.
then we try and make sure that we have enough product to send to them to fill the boxes to provide to vacationers. So
So that's
not
through the Carteret local food network?
yes,
Okay. Oh,
and
that's got my brain spinning. That is so awesome.
so in addition to that, we do have the direct contact with tourists through the farmers market and more importantly, the
Right.
restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, our business will cut by probably 60% after Veterans Day
Really?
because
From the
yeah,
restaurants or from
from the restaurants and from the
wow.
stores because by then tourism for the year is pretty much dried up until April.
Right.
So everybody starts cutting back at that point. We still have, accounts with restaurants through the winter. It's
Mm-hmm.
just not nearly as much.
Gotcha. Well, that's interesting. And which means we need to start garnering more, figuring out how to get tours in through the rest from October through
Yes.
April, right? Because we do have good weather here, October through April, for the most part,
Yeah.
right?
January, February is a little rough.
Well, we're not Chicago, so
True.
yeah,
Perspective, I guess.
exactly. So, okay, so I'm so excited. That makes me so, oh, that's just something new I can talk about too. I mean, that's something completely different. All right, well, we have chatted for 52 minutes and I love it. And are you guys going to be at Newbern this Saturday?
Yes.
Okay,
Miss
Newbern
Rebecca will
Farmers
be there,
Market.
and I'll
Okay,
be in Beaufort at our farmers market.
okay,
If you're in the area, stop in and say
yep.
hi, introduce
All
yourself.
right.
We'd love to meet you.
I will actually put that Newbern Farmers Market website up. And I'm there. I will go see Rebecca in the morning or on Saturday morning, I should say. Um, and maybe I'll pull my bike out and ride down there. Um, if it's going to be good weather. But that's a good little market. And then the other one is Beaufort, right?
Yes, the Beaufort Farmers
And
Market.
where is that located in Beaufort?
It's in downtown Beaufort, right in front
Okay.
of the courthouse, underneath the large oak trees that are kind of in the parking lot.
Okay. I've only been to the hotel down there, the Beaufort
Hotel.
Inn. Yeah, Beaufort Hotel. So I need to come down and see you. Not that I don't want to see Rebecca, but I need to come down and see you too. And check out Beaufort.
Both of the markets have their own particular vibe,
Hmm.
and it's very familial setups in them. Everybody, all the vendors like to work together and take care of each other.
Right, that's good. Yeah, we have, well, I won't, we we've got a lot of arts and crafts at the Newbern one as well.
Yes.
So it's not just farmers. So if you're looking for some unique farmers market items or local products made, you can check out the Newbern one too. So, all right, awesome. Well, I do have one other question for you. One
Hmm.
final question that I ask everybody. What does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience mean to you?
That is a complicated question.
And at the very end of the thing, sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
Um, a safe, inclusive food environment
And sustainable.
and sustainable.
Hmm.
Um, Safety has such a broad interpretation, everything from allergens to pollutants.
Hmm.
So natural sustainable farming, using um, biomaterials to create your fertilizers. I mean, that's huge for me. Working with your seasons so that you're not trying to grow things out of season. That would fall into your sustainability so that you don't need chemicals
Mm-hmm.
to do the job. And as far as inclusivity, everyone is always welcome. It is to break bread with somebody is a moment of trust.
Mm-hmm. I like
And
that.
it's so I think breaking bread with healthy food is a moment of peace and safety for everyone.
Oh, I love that. That's great. That's a wonderful way to end. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ryan Willet. So everybody, this has been Ryan Willet. He is Harlowe Custom Microgreens
Yes,
in Eastern North Carolina. You can
correct.
find him at that website, and I think I posted it already, the website. I did post a link to your book on Amazon as
Thank you.
well. You're welcome. And Beaufort Farmers Market and the New Bern Farmers Market. And Ryan, tell Rebecca I will see her in 1, 2, 3 days at the
Absolutely.
market. All right. And then are you at Beaufort every Saturday, or you guys just do every other week at all of them?
I'm at Beaufort pretty much every Saturday, and she's in
Okay.
New Bern every other.
Okay. All right, perfect. Then that's where you can find them both. But thank you everyone for being here, Ryan. Hang tight with me once I say goodbye to everybody, and stay safe, eat well, and get to know your local farmer like Ryan, because they serve good food.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Until next time, stay safe and eat well.